If you've ever wondered why some thrifted sweaters look charmingly vintage and others look like they survived a bar fight, this video's for you. Today we're talking about how to shop for sweaters from thrift shops, garage sales, vintage shops, your grandma or mother's closet, anywhere you happen to be browsing. And here's the thing, finding a good thrifted sweater isn't luck, it's training your eye. And once you know what to look for, you'll never look at a rack of sweaters the same again. Hi, my name is Taylor, and today we are embarking on what it looks like and how to go about shopping for secondhand sweaters. And I want to start with the big picture. Thrifting is not just about saving money. Honestly, for a lot of people who thrift, money isn't really the reason at all. You do not have to be hard up for cash to find value in a secondhand sweater. You can thrift because older garments often have better construction, better longevity, and just the joy of the hunt. But it's also sustainable. In fact, buying secondhand is one of the most impactful things that you can do if you care about reducing waste. You're keeping garments in circulation instead of in a landfill.
Traditional manufacturing is already harmful to the environment, and after consumers throw away products, they end up in landfills. So one solution is to keep them in use longer.
And whether I knit a sweater myself or I buy it off the rack in a regular store or a thrift shop, one of the most important things to me is longevity. And that's definitely going to be a theme underpinning a lot of what we talk about here today. Today, I'm actually joined here by Gladys. She is wearing the sweater I wore in my previous video. This sweater came from a little vintage, it was a market stall in an outdoor market, and she was a vintage reseller. And I love this sweater. It's one I picked up because of just how lovely it is as a holiday sweater. I love this color. It's fantastic. And I want to use this sweater plus a few others that I have here to illustrate what really matters and what you really want to key in and hone in on when you first start browsing thrift shop sweater racks. When you're thrifting sweaters, the brand name should not be the first thing that you notice. In fact, it most likely will not be the first thing that you notice because it's not the first thing that you see when you see a sweater on a rack. Lead with your senses. If your first sense that gets involved with the shopping process is sight, lead with your sight. Maybe you're attracted to the color. Maybe you're attracted to the silhouette. Maybe it's the texture. Start there. Allow that to draw you in. Your next most likely sense to come into play is going to be your sense of touch. Grab the sleeves. I mean, don't grab them, just like pick them up and, fondle them a little bit. Feel the fabric, give it a little bit of a tug. We're going to talk about this in a little bit, later in the video, but manipulate it a little bit, stretch it out, see how the ribbing feels, see the integrity of the areas that are supposed to be a little bit more elastic. Give the whole sweater a good fondle, if you will, okay? Because that's going to give you a lot of information, not only about how the sweater feels in your hand for the weight and the warmth, but also the fabric that's being used here. What is the fiber type used here? Do you like the way it feels against your skin? If you feel comfortable to do it, take it and put it up against your face. That's a really easy way to decide if this is going to be something that you can wear next to skin. If you're wearing makeup or something and you don't want to make it dirty, do it next to your neck. Right? You just have to kind of use your own discretion. The next thing you want to look at, the continuity of this sweater. Is it holding its shape? When you take it off of the hanger, does it still look like a sweater? Does it still look like it's in the shape it was supposed to be in? Do you notice any kind of weird hanger bumps that happen when a sweater's been hanging on a hanger in a closet for years and years? You don't want that. Those don't go away. It's almost impossible to make those go away, right? So avoid that from the get-go, but just give it a look. Stretch the seams. If you hear crackling, that could be the thread, or it could be the reinforcement crackling. In the case of this sweater, there is seam reinforcement on the shoulders. And so when I pull, I'm hearing this like fabric. It's kind of like a felt fabric kind of crackling. But then if I go to other areas where there's not that reinforcement and I pull, wait, I gotta find a good spot. No crackling. It's like, when you have a bathing suit you've had for years and you go to put it on and it's like, the elastic sounds like popcorn. I don't know what that was. And I don't think it felt very good. You don't want that in your thrifted clothing. Like, those items are kind of done unless somebody wants to replace the elastic. But you want to check for that. That's how you use your senses. Use your sense of hearing, right? So now we've got our sense of sight, our sense of feel, our sense of hearing. Use as many senses that you have at your disposal, okay? To really interact with that sweater before you even concern yourself with the brand name. Because something that happens, and this is really interesting, is you might notice like, oh my gosh, this is a Liz Claiborne or Hugo, I don't know what brand would appeal to people, a Pendleton sweater. It's no matter what I experience with this sweater, it is obviously a quality sweater because it's Pendleton or it's Patagonia or whatever. Be careful. The label can lie. And yes, those are excellent brands. And for the most part, the sweater will probably be, top notch if you're talking Patagonia or Pendleton or whatever. But you still have to do your due diligence to check those first things based on your senses. You could have a Patagonia sweater or a Pendleton sweater that looks great on the hanger, but as soon as you take it off, you notice myriad issues that you don't even want to get yourself involved in. Okay? Start with your senses. Only use the brand as kind of a way to ground your final decision, right? Like you say, okay, well, this sweater feels great. It's a great quality. The seams look excellent. Oh, and it happens to be Liz Sport, all right, which is an offshoot of Liz Claiborne. I'm sure it's a less expensive version, but it doesn't even matter. Like, this doesn't matter to me. I just really love this sweater. But, it does help. It kind of gives you a little bit of a base to work with, right? So keep that in mind. And we're going to talk more about this later in the episode, so put a pin in that. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about how to read the fabric, because this is going to be really important when we're talking about buying sweaters, period, right? Whether it's thrifted or from a regular store, you have to be able to read the fabric. And you don't have to be a textile expert to do this. And let's also be clear here, I'm not about to tell you natural fiber's good, synthetic fiber's bad. It's not that simple. Older sweaters especially can have fantastic synthetic fibers, believe it or not. What matters is how the fabric feels for you, how it's aging, and that's what's really great about buying thrifted sweaters is you already have a sweater that has gone through some kind of a wringer and it's been put through its paces, so you can see how it's aging and holding up. We can look at how that fabric is constructed and whether it still has structural integrity. Let's start with wool and wool blends. As you know, if you're here, obviously that's my personal preference, but let's talk a little bit more about that. If you find a wool or wool blend sweater in a thrift shop, that's usually a fantastic sign. Wool is naturally resilient. It has memory. It springs back. It regulates temperature. And if it's fully fashioned, you've basically struck gold. And if you're asking yourself, what does she mean by fully fashioned? Put a pin in that one as well. We're coming back to it. Look for a lively hand feel. You want the wool to feel like it has a little bit of a life in your hands, not just falling and waxy or heavy. You want it to have a little bit of bounce, a little bit of vitality, a little bit of airiness to it. If there is surface pilling, that doesn't mean that you have to immediately walk away. You want to notice what kind of pilling are we working with here? Are we looking at little tiny pills that are ball shaped on the surface of the fabric that can be taken away easily with some kind of a depilling device? And if you would like to know what kind of great depilling device you could use for this, I have a video for that. I'll link to it down below. If it looks more like that, something completely manageable, a little bit of maintenance is all that you need to do, that's fine. Don't let that turn you away. What you want to avoid here are pills that have matted to the fabric, that are flat and really stuck to the surface. You want to be really careful trying to remove those because chances are they're so embedded in the fabric that if you try to remove them, you're going to damage the overall fabric. Avoid really heavily matted pills and don't worry so much about the ones that are sitting on the surface that can be scraped away gently with a depilling. You want to notice if the sweater has proportional shape. That means the entire sweater is completely unfelted and is holding its shape up evenly across the entire sweater. If part of the sweater has gotten felted from something, or if the entire sweater has felted and the proportions are off, back away. Do not even think about purchasing a secondhand sweater that has been felted, even if for some reason the felting of that sweater has brought it down to size to fit a child in your family. If it has been felted and it's unintentional, that fabric is going to be very stiff and uncomfortable. Unfortunately, that sweater is most likely a lost cause. It's a great one to purchase though, if you'd like to cut it up into pieces and make really nice like trivets or dishcloths. Not dishcloths, but like trivets, like a pot holders. Lastly, you're going to want to check for moth holes, just little tiny holes anywhere. Hold it up to light and make sure there's no light coming in through inconsistent holes in the sweater. Sometimes moth holes are hard to see, so you really want to look for those. It is the most common ailment of secondhand thrifted sweaters, or secondhand wool sweaters, I should say, so check for moth holes. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a completely no-go. You might be able to mend a moth hole or two, but once you have clusters of moth holes, you really need to walk away from that. If the wool still feels soft, resilient, and evenly knit, and you don't notice any of those like matted pilling issues or clusters of moth holes, you've most likely got a winner. Cashmere can be incredible, but it can also be heartbreaking if it's low quality. And this is a whole video all on its own, and we can, get more into this. In fact, I do get into this a little bit, and I'll link to that video down below in the description box as well if you would like to know more about protein-based fibers and what kinds of things to notice and qualities of those things. But for the case of today's video, just know cashmere is great. Low quality cashmere is heartbreaking, not only in terms of what it is as a fiber, how it's sourced, and all of that. It's just not a good thing. Older cashmere tends to be thicker, softer, and longer lasting. Newer, cheaper cashmere pills aggressively, but also know all cashmere pills. It's more about how it pills, where it pills, and what the pills do once they have arrived. Do they mat to the fabric, or do they stay superficial where they can be easily kind of removed with a depiller? Check for density. Check for the character of the pills. Little bouncy ball-like pills that kind of almost can be tugged off the fabric easily without pulling fibers away. That's fine, pretty normal for any cashmere, especially cashmere that tends to be looser knit, if the garment is just a more loosely knit garment. Really tightly knit cashmere sweaters, we're talking fine gauge, almost don't pill at all. And you'll notice that when you see that there's cashmere on the label and it's virtually pill free. It's probably because it's a really nice tightly knit sweater. That's a high quality sweater, and that's a sweater that's probably going to be an older, more vintage sweater. And it's a win as long as you don't have any other issues with it. If you find that cotton is where it's at for you, and actually most of the sweaters I have here are cotton in majority of the fiber content. I have an 80, what is this, 80-20? What is this, 80-20? 60-40, 60% cotton, 100% cotton, 100% cotton, and this is another, I think this is an 80-20, 80% cotton, 20% acrylic. I love a cotton sweater, and I find such great cotton sweaters at thrift stores. This one is also 100% cotton, but you have to remember, cotton has no elasticity. It is not a resilient fiber. It stretches. That's it. But older cotton sweaters can be absolute tanks. I'm telling you, this sweater that I have here, I don't know, the Jean-Pierre, I don't know, it's just this turtleneck sweater. I've worn this so many times. I wore it in my video on menswear patterns, and I know it's kind of hard to see details, and I feel like I'm holding it all funky here, but this thing is an absolute beast. It's heavy, but my lord, the seams are just super durable. It's a fully fashioned sweater. Again, we're gonna get to that. I have to assume this weighs 3-4 pounds. Can't be 4 pounds. I love it. Cotton sweaters can be fantastic. And they're great, especially if you want a sweater that takes you all throughout most of the year. But pay attention for neckline sag, stretched hems, and fading colors across the shoulders. This is a really common area up here where you're going to see fading, because that's where, it's on your shoulders. It gets the most sun. And then if it's kept on hangers in maybe a lit area, or even just the light from incandescent lights, it could fade up there. You really want to pay attention to that. Some fading can be kind of cool. It gives it a vintage edge, but if it's always just in these one areas, that just makes it look worn in not a great way. So you want to pay attention to that. Synthetic fibers, acrylic, nylon, polyester, olefin. I think that's how you pronounce that. These are all synthetic fibers made by man, and they are not inherently bad. And we can have the whole ecological discussion and the environmental discussion and the carcinogenic discussion. That's not this video, okay? And you don't really need to go into that down in the comment section. We don't need that here. That's not what we're talking about today, okay? Synthetic fibers are not inherently bad. I will be here to tell you that all day long. They just require a different kind of evaluation. Older synthetics especially can be incredibly well made. My mom has acrylic sweaters from the 70s that are exceptionally well made and look brand new. I need to actually go see about those. Maybe this weekend. Look for matted pilling, okay? Acrylic pills, just like cashmere pills, just like wool pills, it's going to pill. In fact, polyester and acrylic pill quite a bit, but you really want to make sure the character of the pilling. Is it ball-shaped pills, or is it matted, flat pills? If it's easy to remove with a depiller, it's fine. It's a very easy and just kind of automatic maintenance. My coffee is probably not even warm anymore, that you would be doing with sweaters generally. So you just want to make sure that if it is pilling, it's not crazy over the top pilling, and it's also not matted to the fabric. You also want to make sure the fabric is not limp or lifeless. That could very easily happen with synthetic fibers. Over time, they just kind of become limp. They don't hold their shape as well as they did in the beginning. It just kind of looks lifeless and it looks like somebody's worn it several times, okay? You can't get that kind of vibrancy back. Or if you happen to try it on and you feel like it just doesn't have anything about it that looks special, walk away. In terms of nylon, this is a fantastic addition to any wool sweater or any sweater in general. It adds longevity and durability. Period. Polyester is the fiber that's going to give you that plasticky feel and that squeaky kind of sensation. If you're noticing anything like that in the sweater, walk away. That's the characteristic that gives polyester and acrylic its bad name, but it's really mostly tied to polyester. It's that like synthetic plasticky feel. It's really going to be more noticed in polyester than acrylic, even though some who are more sensitive do tend to find that cheap acrylic can feel that way as well. Polyester is more guilty of that in my opinion, so tread lightly if you notice a sweater is 100% polyester, or even a good portion of the sweater is polyester. Olefin or Exelon is lightweight, strong, but I'm telling you right now that is not breathable. If you sweat, it's not for you. It's just gonna hold all that sweat in there and it's just like a sweatsuit. Okay, so it's gonna smell. And if it's gonna sweat on you, you know who else sweat in that olefin sweater? The person who owned it before you. Okay, so just keep that in the back of your mind. Synthetics should be judged by behavior, not by their label. If the fabric feels good, looks good, and hasn't collapsed or matted after years of wear, that synthetic did its job. And you're purchasing it secondhand. So any qualms that you might have about the environment or synthetic fibers, you can feel good knowing that you're keeping it out of a landfill by keeping it in circulation on your body. Think about doing some integrity tests when you come across a sweater that you're interested in. Scrunch it. Do the scrunch test. I don't know how I can really model this for you, but you'll know it when you do it. Do the scrunch test. It should all just kind of come right back. What am I even doing? Just scrunch it like this. Give it a little squish, a little scrunch. It should feel like it kind of bounces back and it doesn't stay compressed into that shape, okay? You want it to have a little bit of resiliency. Obviously, cotton's not going to do it as much as wool, but you get what I'm meaning. Same with the stretch test. Stretch out little like cuffs, stretch out areas that are supposed to stretch and make sure that they bounce back to shape. So you can see that these cuffs kind of narrow out. If I stretch them out like this, they bounce back. That's good. We want that. Also, do a light test, a light fastness check. Do you notice any uneven areas of color? Any place where it's fading in a way that you don't like, that looks not great? Because if you notice any of that, you're not going to fix that unless you completely dye the garment. And you want to make sure that you go into thrifting sweaters. I'm going to drop this little tidbit right in here. Don't go into thrifting sweaters with the idea that you're going to pay $6 for a sweater that you're going to spend $40 mending or dyeing, and your time is money, okay, right? So however much time you put into it, just go ahead and put a price tag on that time, right? And if all of that equates to $40 extra, it's still a $46 sweater that needed work, okay? So don't go into it thinking, well, I'll just, I'll fix it. Or I'll dye over this. Like, no. Tread lightly, pump the brakes, and really think that through before diving in. When it comes to fabric, don't get hung up on natural versus synthetic. Get hung up on quality. A well-made acrylic sweater from 1986 will outperform a cheaply made acrylic sweater from 2019 any day. Every single time. Look at how the fabric has lived, not just what the tag says. Okay, we have finally arrived at something that I think is really incredibly important when you're purchasing sweaters, period. But especially when you're purchasing sweaters secondhand. Now, it's not a deal breaker, but it's something that you should notice in the construction of the sweater. And that is whether the sweater has been fully fashioned or cut and sewn. Those two types of construction can make the difference between whether a sweater lasts or dissolves into fluff the moment you sneeze in it. When a sweater is fully fashioned, each piece of the sweater, the front, the back, the sleeves, all of that is knit correctly in the shape that it needs to be in from the beginning. Finished edges, all of it. Nothing is cut out and then assembled. The edges are finished edges created intentionally during the knitting process. Then those pieces are joined together using a linking machine or some kind of a hand knitting technique, providing flatter seams, stronger seams, better drape, and far better longevity. And subsequently just more value. And one of the biggest takeaways, one of the biggest points of fully fashioned knitwear, fully fashioned sweaters is that these sweaters are incredibly mendable. And a sweater that is mendable, something that can be fixed easily without unraveling, means it's more sustainable, means it's going to last longer, and it contributes to the whole longevity factor. If a seam pops, you can reseam it. If a stitch pulls, you can reinforce it. These garments were built so someone could care for them. And yes, fully fashioned sweaters typically and ought to cost more than their cut and sewn counterpart. And we're going to get into that in the next section. But first, I want to share with you an example of why a fully fashioned sweater, what that looks like, and why it's important as it relates to how you can mend a sweater. This is a sweater I purchased at a thrift store, fully intact. Everything was fine. However, it got caught on an earring or like a piece of jewelry or something. And one of these little seam threads broke. Okay. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a second. This sweater, let's just get a little close here at the shoulder seams. You can see the shoulder seams. You see how beautifully constructed those are? If I flip this inside out so that you can see the way that they look on the inside, you will notice that the pieces of this sweater, fronts, the backs, the sleeves, were all fully fashioned and then seamed together with a hand seaming technique. It's very easy to notice that if you can see this seam right here. If you look at it closely, and I'm trying to do this so that I can see what I'm showing you. This right here, underneath the seam, there is a row of crochet stitches that are holding the two pieces together in kind of a mattress stitch situation. And it's across all of the seams here as well. You can see it right here. There are the two pieces of the two edges, and they are seamed together. You can actually see the thread seaming them together along there. Fully fashioned. Nothing here has been cut and sewn together. Everything is locked in place with a hand stitching technique, or some kind of a linking machine was used to link all the pieces together. Even the ribbing at the bottom of the sweater was fully fashioned and already a part of the main body of the sweater. It's so neat. Like the way that this was, I don't know, actually, it looks like it was just all knit in one piece, this part and this part, based on the way that it looks right there. But otherwise, everything is fully fashioned. Nothing was cut and sewn together. The pieces of this sweater were manufactured in the shape that they needed to be in to be attached and sewn together. Now, this leads me to the little issue that I have here. So you can see right here, this thread, if I keep pulling, it's going to keep unraveling. That is the thread that is holding the two pieces of the sweater together. That is the thread that is part of the seam holding the front of the sweater and the back of the sweater together. If I pull this, both pieces would still be intact. Both this side and this side would still be intact fully. They would not unravel because there's no raw edges here. This thread is the one that was cut and it's coming apart at the seam, literally. But because the sweater is fully fashioned, it's just a matter of me recouping some of this, or even getting a different thread that would match, and simply going in and doing a mattress stitch to bring the seams back together again. If this sweater were cut and sewn, meaning if each piece was just cut with scissors to create the shape that it needed for the sweater and then sewn together, these edges of the different parts of the sweater would be completely unraveling, and I would have to do so much more to mend it, and it would kind of be fruitless in the end. It can be done, but it can't be done as cleanly and with as much intention as this can be. This is something that I look at this and I see complete mendability. It's just a matter of me catching the yarn and weaving it back through in a mattress stitch, and I'm back in business. No big deal. The sweater is perfectly wearable again. And you can kind of see, other than this like thread being kind of curly, you can see how clean the hole is right there at the seams. just seam it back together and you're back in business. Mendability is huge. And you find that with sweaters that have been cut, or excuse me, sweaters that have been fully fashioned. Now, that leads me to what it means for a sweater to be cut and sewn, which takes us back to this one, because that's exactly what this one is. Imagine cookie cutters, okay? Imagine rolling out a big sheet of dough and using a cookie cutter to cut out shapes, and then taking those shapes and smashing them together to create a three-dimensional gingerbread man stuffed with frosting. I don't know, right? But we cut the shapes out by just cutting them out of a larger piece of fabric and then stitching them together. Cut and sewn sweaters, like the one that I have over here, that's exactly what's done. They take the shape that they need for the different parts of the sweater and they cut it out of one larger piece of fabric. So this front of the sweater here was just cut out of a big long rectangle of fabric, almost like a cookie cutter would be. And what does that do? It leaves raw edges. Raw edges that, if they aren't picked up in some way, are going to unravel. Because once you cut into knitting, there's no going back. It will unravel until you do something about the raw edges, correct? That's what a cut and sewn sweater has. That's how it's constructed. In order to get those edges to stay put and not unravel, they are serged together using what's called a serger, and then the sweater is assembled. And you can see that, and I'm going to compare these two seams for you from the one that I was just showing you. You can see that here. Do you see the threads that go over the edge of the knitting? That is done by a serging machine. If those little threads were to come undone or be cut somehow, the edges of the two sides, or the two front and back of the sweater, would be completely raw, and the sweater would begin to unravel. And you can see all the little tiny hairy ends sticking out of the serged fabric because it's just raw edges. Now, granted, they're trapped. They're not going to go anywhere because the serging is holding up, but it still shows you that these are raw edged pieces of fabric that have been serged together so they don't unravel. This is a cheaper way of constructing a sweater. This is not the ideal way of constructing a sweater. And you can actually kind of see too, you see how curly that is? That curl that's happening right there is exactly because of that. Because you're serging the fabric together, and that's really hard to control tension. And when it's being done really quickly and just sent through a serging machine, you're going to get some kind of a crimp, especially over time as the sweater is worn and washed. That's not going to hold up neatly and cleanly. Eventually, either the thread of the serged portion or the fibers in the fabric are going to shrink. Something is going to go off and be wonky, and you're going to have these curled seams. Yes, this is not the greatest construction for a sweater. Yes, I purchased it anyway because honestly, I feel like the seams, it wasn't a deal breaker. Everything feels really good and rigid. I don't have any holes. I don't necessarily love the way that looks, the sleeve seams here. It's not as clean. It's just not. I mean, you can even see like there's no continuity between the texture on the sleeve and the texture on the front and the shoulder of the sweater. It just doesn't match up. And that's because we're dealing with pieces of fabric that were just cut and sewn together. I don't want to say haphazardly, but there's just no blending of design. Whereas if you look at this one, and we're using it as an example, actually, because this one is already right side out, let's just use this one. This one is also fully fashioned. This is not cut and sewn. And you can see how lovely the integrity is, how the design, that the texture on the front of the sweater leads beautifully into the texture on the sleeves. It's all fully fashioned and gorgeous. The underarms, I mean, it's beautiful. It really is. It's beautiful. It feels higher quality. It just feels like the sweater is fully intentional. This sweater is much more of a festive sweater. It's just texture for texture's sake, beautiful color, and it really does feel pretty good. The construction is going to hold up. And so even though it is a cut and sewn sweater, it's a higher quality cut and sewn sweater, if that makes any sense. The less you pay for a cut and sewn sweater, the more, I'm going to use this word lightly. Just don't take this with a grain of salt. The more haphazardly it has been constructed, okay? You should not pay more for a cut and sewn sweater than a fully fashioned sweater. Fully fashioned sweaters ought to cost more because more care has gone into the garment and you're going to get more out of that garment. So keep that in mind. Always err on the side of cut and sewn if you can. But if you can't, you can always buy a sweater that is, take that. Always err on the side of fully fashioned knitwear if you can. And if you can't, meaning if you find a sweater you just can't live without, that is cut and sewn, just make sure that there's a lot of good seam integrity and everything's holding up really well. Honestly, just knowing and understanding what you're getting makes all the difference. There's something grounding about standing between the two metal racks at a thrift store, sifting through what the world has already lived in. Sweaters tell the truth in a way online shopping just can't. And when you do find that gem, fully fashioned wool with sturdy seams, perfect color, it feels like discovering a little piece of history that's ready for its second life. So that's my approach to shopping thrifted sweaters. If you take anything from today's video, let it be this. You are allowed to want well-made clothes, and you are allowed to find them on a thrift rack, regardless of your income stream. Thanks for being here with me today, guys, and listening to me ramble. Take good care of your sweaters, and they'll take good care of you. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.